Check the camera. You're being lied to." That's what the nurse said. No emotion, no eye contact, just a whisper as she slipped a piece of wrapper into my hand, folded twice and damp from her glove. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. And Lord, I wish I didn't. My name is Gloria Jennings. I'm 63 years old. I've been a nurse, a wife, a mother, a widow, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for the moment you realize the person you love most in this world has looked you dead in the eyes and lied. It started 5 nights ago. I got a call from the emergency room. My son Malcolm had been in a serious motorcycle accident. That's what they said, serious, as in maybe won't walk again. I remember grabbing my coat, keys, purse, couldn't even remember where I parked the car. I drove on autopilot, praying harder than I ever had in my life. I kept saying his name. Please, God, let my baby live. Let my Malcolm live. When I got to the hospital, I didn't see a man. I saw my little boy again, bandaged and still, tubes in his arms, a brace on his neck. They said spinal trauma, lower body paralysis, and all I could do was sit down right there in that cold plastic chair and crumble. I cried so hard I couldn't feel my hands. Not in front of him, never in front of him. But later that night, alone in the chapel, I begged God to take me instead. I had already lived my life. Malcolm still had so much to do. A family, a future. Why him? Why now? For the next few days, I did what any mother would do. I slept beside his bed in that uncomfortable chair with my knees curled up. I fed him spoonfuls of soup. I prayed over his body like I used to when he had night terrors as a child. I whispered to him while he slept, telling him he was strong, that we'd get through this, that I'd take care of him no matter what. Bethany, his wife, was barely around. She came in wearing lipstick and heels like she was headed to court, not the ICU. Said she had work, but she found the time to bring me legal papers. Said it would be smart to put the house in Malcolm's name. For medical planning, she claimed, to protect his future. I told her no, politely, but firmly. That house was mine. My sweat and my struggle paid every inch of that mortgage. My husband's name was still carved in the tree out back. I wasn't giving it up, not even to my own child. Bethany didn't argue. She just smiled in that way that always felt too calm. Think about it, she said, touching my shoulder. It's the right thing. I thought that was the end of it until the nurse came. Check the camera. You're being lied to. That's all she said. I almost laughed. It sounded like a bad soap opera line, but she looked at me like she needed me to understand, so I held on to that paper all day like it was sacred. I didn't mention it, not to anyone. That night, I found Curtis, the night security guard. I brought him a cup of coffee, sweet and hot the way he liked it, and I asked him for a favor. I told him I had reason to believe something wasn't right, and bless his heart, he didn't even ask questions. He led me to the small, dimly lit security office and queued up the footage from room 214, Malcolm's room, time-stamped at 2:13 a.m. And what I saw broke something in me. Malcolm, my son, the same boy I thought was paralyzed, stood up. Without help. No hesitation. Just stood. He stretched his arms like he'd been stiff from sitting too long. He smiled. Then Bethany walked in, and he pulled her close. They kissed, they laughed, and then God help me, they talked. I think she's ready, Bethany said. She's exhausted. Keep laying it on. Guilt works better when they're tired. She's always been soft, Malcolm replied. I'll cry a little tomorrow. That'll push her over. And if she still says no, Bethany asked. Malcolm chuckled. She won't. It's just a house. She'll give it up. She loves me too much. My heart exploded in my chest. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard I thought my nails might snap off. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Their voices echoed in that tiny room like knives. She'll give it up. She loves me too much. He was right. I had loved him too much. Too blindly. Too completely. I had wrapped my entire identity around being his mother. I had fought for him, worked night shifts, missed birthdays, skipped meals, slept in my car on double shifts, all for him. And he used that love against me. I didn't cry. Not yet. I stumbled out of that office like a drunk. My knees barely held me. I found a dark hallway, a supply closet, somewhere, God, I don't even know where, and I collapsed. I pressed my face into my arms and screamed, but not out loud. No, this pain doesn't scream. This pain sinks like a heavy stone tied to your ribs. I cried the kind of cry only a mother knows, the kind that doesn't have words, the kind that pulls the breath from your lungs and leaves you gasping like a fish on dry land. How could he? How could he? I would have given him that house if he'd just asked with truth in his eyes. I would have given him my soul, my body, my everything. But he chose the lie. He chose to perform pain instead of share it. He chose to scheme. When I finally stood back up, legs shaking, I didn't feel like myself anymore. Something in me had changed, hardened. They thought I was soft, that I'd break. But I am Gloria Jennings. And I didn't survive this long to be broken by a pair of snakes in suits and lies. They think I'm just an old woman clinging to her memories. But they forgot. This old woman remembers everything. And now I have proof. If this story touched you, hit like and drop your city in the comments. You never know who nearby might be watching with you. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car just outside the hospital parking garage, engine off, radio silent, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it could keep me grounded. But nothing could. My world was upside down, spinning so fast I couldn't catch my breath. My son, the boy I raised with every ounce of love in my body, had looked me in the face and lied. And not just lied, conspired, deceived, used my own love like a tool to pry open the one thing I had left, my home. That morning, I drove back to the house on Prince Street. My house, a modest, 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a creaky porch swing. Nothing fancy, but it held memories in every nail and beam. The scent of my husband's aftershave still lived in the bathroom cabinet. The spot on the kitchen wall where Malcolm measured his height every year still had faint pencil lines, from age 5 all the way to 21. I walked through each room like I was visiting a crime scene. In the kitchen, I made coffee strong and bitter and sat at the table staring at the unpaid water bill, the grocery list I'd written 2 days ago, the envelope from Bethany's law office still sealed. I didn't open it. I knew what it was. Paperwork to transfer the deed to Malcolm, the same house I built with blood, sweat, and hours no one ever paid me for. I thought about calling him, about confronting him, about storming into that hospital room and throwing the footage in his face. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there and remembered who I was. I was Gloria Jennings. I had survived the death of a husband, 30 years of double nursing shifts, and the loneliness that comes from watching your friends fade away one by one. I had raised a boy into a man, and now I had to face the reality that I might not know that man at all. I remembered the first time Malcolm lied to me. He was 8, stole a chocolate bar from Mr. Conway's corner store. I made him return it, apologize, and sweep the floor for a week. He cried, said he was sorry, and I believed him. Because back then, it was just a child's mistake. But now? Now it was betrayal. Adult betrayal. Strategic and cold. Later that afternoon, I went back to the hospital. I had to keep up the act, pretend I didn't know what I knew. I needed time. I needed a plan. Curtis had promised to give me a copy of the footage, but it would take a day or two to discreetly burn it to a drive. I brought Malcolm his favorite lemon muffins from Sylvia's bakery. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, Ma," he said, voice low and fragile. "You sleep at all?" "Couple hours," I lied, placing the paper bag on the bedside table. "How you feeling?" He shrugged. "Same. Legs are still dead weight. They're talking about a wheelchair evaluation next week." I nodded, watching him carefully. His face was convincing, maybe even Oscar-worthy. Bethany walked in not long after, dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread. She kissed Malcolm's cheek and barely looked in my direction. "Hi, Gloria," she said flatly. I smiled back. "Hello, Bethany. You're looking sharp today." She blinked, sensing something beneath my tone, but not sure what. "Thanks," she said slowly. "Just came from the office." "Still working on those papers for the house?" I asked lightly. Her lips twitched. "We're just trying to make sure Malcolm's protected, that's all. Things happen fast with these medical cases. It's good to plan ahead." I looked at her, looked at my son, and smiled gently. "I'm sure it is." They exchanged a quick glance. Bethany pulled a manila envelope from her bag and slid it across the tray table. "No pressure," she said sweetly. Just look it over when you have time." I didn't touch it. Instead, I stood and kissed Malcolm's forehead. "You rest now," I said softly. "We'll talk later." I left the room, the envelope untouched behind me. Outside in the corridor, my knees nearly buckled. I caught myself on the wall, heart thudding like a war drum. I just smiled at the woman who was playing me like a violin. I'd brought breakfast to the man I carried in my womb, who now plotted to steal the roof over my head. And I had smiled. Because I needed time. Because I wasn't ready. Not yet. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. I am my mother's daughter. A Southern woman who learned how to stitch wounds and bake cornbread in the same breath. I've been knocked down more times than I can count, but I never stayed there. This wasn't over. I was going to get to the bottom of every lie, and when the time was right, I wasn't just going to speak the truth. I was going to make them hear it. Curtis handed me the flash drive the next evening. No words, just a nod as he slipped it into my palm like a back-alley drug deal. He knew what he was giving me was heavy, something no mother should ever have to see. I tucked it into my purse without looking at it. I already knew what was on it. But I needed it. Proof. Evidence. Not for the courts, at least not yet, but for my soul. I needed to see it again. To believe it wasn't a nightmare I'd made up in my grief. That night, I waited until nearly midnight before I plugged it into my old laptop. I lit a single lamp in the living room, the kind with the warm, amber glow that softened even the harshest truths. I sat in my recliner, the same one James used to fall asleep in with the remote still in his hand, and I watched. Malcolm. Standing, walking, laughing. Replaying the video didn't dull the blow, it sharpened it. Every gesture he made, every smirk exchanged with Bethany, was a twist of the knife. They weren't even being careful. That's what struck me most. No fear of being caught. As if they knew I'd never look. As if my trust was so absolute, it made me blind. I paused the footage at the moment Bethany pulled out a small stack of papers and placed them on the bedside tray. "Make sure she signs it this week," she said, before her nerves catch up to her brain. "She won't question it," Malcolm replied, peeling a banana. "She thinks I'm her baby boy. Always will." I slammed the laptop shut so hard the lamp flickered. My baby boy. That's what he still was to me, even after everything. That's the part that broke me again and again. It wasn't just the lie, it was who the lie came from. I used to rock that boy to sleep during thunderstorms. When he was 5 and had nightmares, I'd sing, "You Are My Sunshine," until he drifted off. I still remember the first time he rode a bike without training wheels. He crashed into the mailbox and cried. But I told him, "Fall again, get up stronger." Now I was the one who had to get up. The next morning, I called Randall. He was an old friend of my late husband's, a retired cop who still had some pull around the city. He used to play cards with James in our backyard every Thursday. After James passed, Randall came by less, but he never stopped checking in on birthdays and holidays. He picked up on the second ring. "Gloria? Everything all right?" "No," I said plainly. "But it will be." I told him everything. Not just about the footage, but the feelings, the doubts, the moments I'd brushed aside. I told him about the papers, about Bethany, about the way Malcolm had changed since the wedding. I didn't cry. Not even once. I told it like I was reading a weather report. Cold front moving in. Storm brewing. Randall listened without interrupting. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Damn," he said. "You sure about all this?" "I watched it with my own eyes, Randall. Twice. Very place to bound. And what to the processins?" He was quiet a moment. "All right, let me make a few calls." That afternoon, I went back to the hospital. My heart beat like a drum, but my face didn't show it. I brought homemade stew and a fresh blanket, just like always. Bethany was there when I arrived, sitting by Malcolm's bed and scrolling through her phone. "Hi, Gloria," she said without looking up. "Afternoon, dear," I replied, placing the Tupperware on the tray. Made Malcolm his favorite beef stew with carrots and a splash of red wine. "That's sweet of you," she said with that fake smile that barely moved her lips. Malcolm looked tired, or at least tried to. His head was tilted just enough to appear weak, but not uncomfortable. It was subtle. Too subtle. I noticed every move now, every sigh, every pause before he answered a question. It was all calculated. I sat beside him, reaching for his hand. It used to comfort me. Now it felt like holding a stranger. "How are you feeling today, baby?" "Same," he said softly. "Hurts to move, but I'm managing." I nodded. "That's brave of you." He blinked, trying to read me. Bethany stood. "I've got to run. Court this afternoon." I smiled. "Of course. You go do what you do best." She tilted her head, uncertain, then left with a click of her heels. Once we were alone, I looked at Malcolm. Really looked. There was a time I could read his soul through his eyes. Now, they were a locked door. "You remember the first time you lied to me?" I asked suddenly. He looked surprised. "What?" "You were 8. The chocolate bar." He frowned. "I don't—" "You said Mr. Conway gave it to you. Said he was doing a giveaway for kids. I made you return it, sweep the floor, apologize. You remember now?" A pause, then a nod. "Why are you bringing that up?" I shrugged. "Just thinking about how we teach people who we are by what we allow." He said nothing. I stood up, brushing off my coat. "You rest now. I'll be back tomorrow." As I walked out, I didn't look back. I had work to do. 2 days later, I sat on my front porch with a glass of sweet tea and a notebook in my lap. The fall wind rustled through the oak trees that lined Prince Street, and for a brief moment, I could almost forget the storm I was living in. Almost, but when you've seen the truth, it never really lets you go. My son was lying to me, pretending to be paralyzed, plotting behind my back with a woman who wore perfume like armor and smiled like a knife. And worst of all, he was doing it all with the assumption that I'd be too soft, too old, or too blind to see it. He forgot I've seen more lies in my years as a nurse than he'll ever craft in a lifetime. Randall showed up that afternoon, wearing his usual windbreaker and carrying a box of files. "Got something," he said, dropping the box on my dining table with a grunt. Medical reports, financials, insurance logs, and I had a guy pull the recent land records too. I poured us both some tea and sat down. "Tell me everything." He opened the folder labeled Malcolm Jennings. "So, your son's insurance claim says he's permanently disabled. Applied for benefits 2 days after the accident. Fast-tracked. Already approved. You know what that means?" I nodded. "He gets paid." "Exactly. Monthly disability. Plus an upfront payment for adjustments, wheelchair ramps, home modifications, all that." I clenched my jaw. "And I bet Bethany's handling all the paperwork." "She is. Every signature tracks back to her name as representative caretaker. But that's not all." He slid another file toward me. 3 days before the accident, Malcolm transferred 20 grand into a new account. Not in his name, in Bethany's maiden name. I stared at the paper. "Why?" Randall shrugged. "Rainy day fund. Or maybe they knew this storm was coming and wanted to be ready." I leaned back in my chair. My heart ached, not from surprise, but from the bitter confirmation. It was all premeditated. The accident, the performance, the manipulation. They had planned it down to the paperwork. "Do you have anything else?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "One more thing. A friend of mine at the hospital pulled the internal log. Someone turned off the motion sensor alert for Malcolm's room manually. Twice." I shook my head, blinking fast. "Why would they do that?" "To avoid triggering staff," Randall said. "Those sensors alert nurses when a patient moves, especially someone supposed to be immobile. Someone didn't want them to know he was walking." I sat in silence. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding. "Can we prove it?" Randall looked me square in the eyes. "We're close. Real close." That night, I went back to the hospital with more than stew and soft words. I went back with a plan. When I walked into room 214, Malcolm was half watching a TV show. Bethany wasn't there. Good. I needed him alone. "Hi, Ma," he said, voice groggy. "You look tired." I smiled, setting down the food. "Been a long week." "I'll ground." He nodded, then shifted in bed carefully, with just enough strain to remind me of his supposed condition. "Malcolm," I said gently, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why didn't you tell me about the insurance?" He froze. "Just for a second." "What do you mean?" I tilted my head. "The disability claim. The money. I would have helped. I still can." His eyes darted. "Bethany handled all that. I wasn't even thinking straight after the crash." "Of course," I said, still smiling. "And the 20,000 in Bethany's maiden name?" He blinked again. Longer this time. I don't know what that is. I nodded. All right. He looked at me then, his face faltering. Why are you asking all this? I walked to the window and pulled the blind slightly. The red light blinked in the corner, quiet, watching. No reason, I said. Just thinking about what people do when they think no one's watching. He sat still. Too still. I turned back to him. You remember that chocolate bar you stole when you were 8? He didn't answer. I made you give it back. Sweep the floor. Say sorry, you cried. He was silent. I forgave you because I believed it was just a child's mistake. But now, I stepped closer. Now, I don't think you made a mistake. I think you learned a lesson that day that you could lie to me and get away with it if you just cried hard enough. His jaw tightened. Ma, I don't know what you're I raised my hand. Don't. Please, don't. I picked up the stew container. You eat this, and think about the next time you'll see me. He frowned. Why? Because the next time, I said softly, I won't be coming with soup. Then I turned and walked out, my spine straight, my heart shattered, but my purpose clear. This wasn't just about lies anymore. It was about justice, and I was going to find it. I didn't go to the hospital the next day. For the first time since the accident, I stayed home, and I let the silence in the house breathe. No TV, no gospel radio. Just the sound of the refrigerator hum and the ticking of the old kitchen clock. James's favorite, the one shaped like a rooster, still ticking after all these years. I sat at the dining table, notebook open, making a list of everything I knew, every inconsistency, every shift in Malcolm's story, every lie Bethany smiled through. I wasn't just Gloria Jennings, the mother anymore. I was Gloria Jennings, the woman who was going to take her life back. That afternoon, I called Randall again. Can you get me someone inside the hospital? I asked. Not a nurse, someone higher up, someone who'll care. I'll ask around, he said. Why? Because it's time someone saw the performance, and I want someone in power to see it. Later that evening, I got a call back. Randall had connected with an old colleague, Marie Dawson, head of patient risk and compliance at Newark General. Marie had known Randall from a fraud case years back and owed him a favor. She's expecting your call, Randall said. I didn't hesitate. I dialed her number, heart pounding like a warning drum. Mrs. Jennings? Marie answered. Calm, professional. Yes, ma'am, I said. I believe there's a patient currently faking a spinal injury to commit insurance fraud in your hospital. That patient is my son. A pause. I see. I have footage. A nurse passed it to me. He's walking, dancing, and he's not alone in this. I heard her typing in the background. What room? Mrs. Jennings, you understand these are serious accusations. I do, I said, but I've been serious my whole life. I raised that boy on a nurse's salary. I know what real pain looks like, what real disability is. He's faking, and he's doing it with help. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I want to see the footage. Can you come tomorrow? I'll be there at 9. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Slacks, blouse, my wedding ring still on my hand, though it felt heavier these days. I brought the flash drive and a heart full of fire. I was tired of being treated like someone who could be brushed aside. I was tired of being called Ma with pity and fake love. At the hospital, Marie met me in her office. She was tall, stern, and didn't waste words. We watched the footage together. I didn't flinch, I didn't explain, I just let the images speak. Malcolm standing, laughing, Bethany kissing his cheek, the fake strain in his voice disappearing the second the door closed. When it ended, Marie exhaled through her nose. God help me, she said. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. It's worse, I said. It's theft, it's manipulation, and it's happening in your hospital. She nodded slowly. Do you want to file a formal complaint? No, I said. Not yet. She raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because I want to see how far they'll go. I want to know how deep this goes, and if you're willing to help me, we can catch them in the act. Marie leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. You've got guts, Mrs. Jennings. No, I said. I've got nothing left to lose. She agreed to help. Quietly, discreetly. She'd begin checking internal communications, tracking Bethany's badge usage, monitoring the equipment logs from room 214. She said she'd keep me updated through Randall. That night, I returned home with my shoulders straighter than they'd been in days. But the peace didn't last long. Bethany called me. Her voice was light, sugary, sweet. "Hi, Gloria. Malcolm was wondering if you're coming by tomorrow. He's been missing your soup." I took a deep breath. "Tell him I'll be there. I'm making chicken and rice. I'll bring extra." "Perfect," she said. "Oh, and just checking in. About the papers. Any thoughts?" I smiled into the phone. "Yes. I've been thinking a lot." I hung up before she could ask anything else. The next morning, I cooked the soup, just like I always did. But this time, I tucked the flash drive into my purse again. Not to show, just to carry. A reminder that I wasn't imagining any of this, that my pain was real, that my son's betrayal wasn't just in my heart, it was on tape. At the hospital, I walked into room 214 and placed the soup on the tray. Malcolm smiled. "Hey, Ma." "Hey, baby." He looked tired again. Too tired. The fake kind of tired that didn't reach the eyes. "You didn't have to come all the way here," he said. "I know this has been hard." "It has," I said softly, "but you're my son. I'll always come for you." He looked down, maybe feeling guilt, or maybe just rehearsing his next act. "I talked to Bethany," he said. "She said you're thinking about the deed?" "I am." He lit up. "Really?" I nodded. I think I just needed time. Behind my eyes, I was screaming, but on the outside, I was calm. I was the mother they thought they could break. I stayed only 15 minutes. I didn't want to overplay my hand. As I left, I passed Tracy, the nurse who had given me the note. She nodded at me once. I nodded back, no words. We both knew the truth. I wasn't just playing along anymore. I was laying a trap. The next few days, I played the role they had written for me, the tired, trusting mother. I brought soup, I fluffed pillows, I gave weak smiles and long sighs. And all the while, I watched them watching me. Malcolm was growing bolder, his acting more polished. He even asked the doctor in front of me if there was any chance for miraculous recovery. It was so perfectly timed it almost made me laugh. Almost. Bethany kept hovering. She started asking personal questions about my bank accounts, my utility bills, even my will. "You know," she said one afternoon while stirring a cup of my coffee, "it might be a good idea to get everything organized, in case something happens." "In case something happens?" I repeated, my voice cool. "I just mean, for peace of mind." I smiled. "For whom?" She laughed nervously. "For everyone, of course." I didn't say anything, just handed her a cookie and changed the subject. I've learned that silence makes liars squirm faster than shouting ever will. That night, Randall called. "Marie found something," he said. There was a call placed from Bethany's work number to a private clinic in Montclair. That clinic specializes in rehab services for injuries that don't exist. I closed my eyes. So they've done this before? Maybe. Or maybe they're trying to lay low until the payout clears. But the bigger news, she's been using Malcolm's case as a test model for a book proposal, Navigating Life with a Paralyzed Spouse. She even pitched it to a publishing agent last week. I felt my stomach turn. "She's writing a book?" I whispered. "Working title, Stronger Together." I stood from my chair too fast and had to steady myself. This wasn't just about my son anymore. This woman was building a life, money, fame, public sympathy on the ashes of my trust. It was time to raise the stakes. The next morning, I called Bethany. "Hey, sugar," I said, trying to sound sweet. "I was wondering, do you think we could get together and go over those deed papers, maybe this weekend?" She sounded surprised, but excited. "Of course, that's great, Gloria. I can bring everything to your place." "Saturday morning?" "Perfect." What she didn't know was that Randall and Marie would also be there watching, listening, and collecting every word. I spent Friday baking. It was the strangest sensation making cornbread while planning to trap your own child and his wife. But somehow, the familiarity of kneading dough helped steady me. Like the scent of vanilla and cinnamon could keep me from falling apart. Saturday came. I set the table like I used to on Sundays, tea, cookies, fruit, the deed papers laid out neatly in the center. Bethany arrived dressed like she was going to a church brunch, flowery dress, high heels, red lipstick too bright for morning. She hugged me at the door. "You look beautiful," I said, voice warm. She beamed. "Thank you. I'm so happy you're finally ready." We sat. I poured tea. Randall was hidden in the guest room with a recording device. Marie was on standby nearby, listening in through a mic Randall had set up in the kitchen clock, old tech from his days on the force. Bethany took out the papers. "I just need your signature here and here," she said, pointing quickly. "We already pre-filled Malcolm as co-owner, so everything will transfer seamlessly if God forbid anything happens." I looked over the pages. It was all there, legal, binding, permanent. "Can I ask something?" I said. "Of course. If I gave you this house, what would you do with it?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you and Malcolm, would you move in? Sell it? Rent it?" She laughed lightly. "I mean, we haven't talked specifics. I just want to make sure he's taken care of. Even if that means I'm not in the picture?" She looked taken aback. "Gloria, that's not what I'm just curious. It's a big step." She hesitated. "Honestly, we've talked about selling, but just to get a place closer to the city, something more modern." I nodded. "That makes sense. The porch swings old, and the stairs creak." "Exactly," she said, relieved. "It's really for the best." I stood up then and walked to the counter, picked up the envelope with the flash drive and placed it next to the papers. "You might want to watch this before I sign anything." Her face froze. "What is it?" "Proof," I said. "Of everything. You and Malcolm. The lies. The walking. The dancing. Even the part where you talk about me like I'm a stupid old woman too blinded by love to see what's happening." Her mouth opened, then closed. "Gloria, No," I said, my voice sharp now. "You listen." I leaned in, hands flat on the table. I wiped blood off Malcolm's chin the day he fell, learning to ride a bike. I stayed up through nights of croup, of fevers, of panic attacks. I buried his father. I held this family together. And for what? So you can write a damn book about caring for a crippled husband while you cash out my roof? Bethany stood, eyes wide. She backed toward the door. "I didn't mean to." "You meant every word," I said. "And now the hospital knows. The insurance board will too. And if you think this ends here, think again." She fled without another word. I heard the guest room door creak open. Randall stepped out, holding the recorder. "Well," he said, "that was a hell of a show." "It's not Tenyon." Marie texted 5 minutes later. "Hospital's launching internal investigation Monday." I looked around my kitchen, my home, my battlefield, and I realized something. I hadn't just survived. I had started to win. Sunday came like a storm after the quiet. My hands shook not from fear, but from the weight of what I had done. I had drawn a line, one that could never be erased. Bethany had crossed it first, but now I had pushed back. Hard. And I knew the next confrontation would not be with her. It would be with Malcolm. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed listening to the wind rattle the windows, remembering when Malcolm was a toddler and used to crawl into my bed during storms. He'd clutch my arm and whisper, "Don't let the wind take me, Mama." And I never did. But now, he had let something far worse take him. Pride, greed, shame. When Monday morning came, I didn't bring soup. I didn't bring kindness. I brought the truth. Room 214 felt colder than usual. Malcolm was awake, propped up with extra pillows. He looked thinner, somehow like the weight of his own lies had started to chew through his flesh. "Hey, Ma," he said, like nothing had happened. "You didn't come by yesterday." I closed the door behind me. I had company. He tilted his head. "Everything all right?" "No," I said, "but it will be." I walked slowly toward him and pulled up the chair. My purse sat in my lap, unopened. Inside, a single copy of the flash drive remained unlabeled, but known. "Bethany came over Saturday," I said, watching his eyes. He blinked. "Oh?" "She brought the papers again. You know the ones." A flicker of tension crossed his jaw. "I told her I was ready to sign," I continued. She smiled so wide. You would have thought she won the lottery. Malcolm looked down at his blanket. "That's not what this is about." I cut him off. "She told me the plan. Sell the house, move to the city, start over." His lips parted slightly. "Malcolm," I said, voice low, "I raised you better than this." He didn't answer, but his fingers fidgeted under the covers, nervous, exposed. "I saw the footage," I continued, "of you walking, dancing, laughing. He looked at me now, really looked, and I saw it then. Not guilt, not shame, fear. "I don't know what you think you saw," he said, carefully rehearsed. I leaned forward. "Stop." He froze. "Just stop," I whispered. "I'm not asking for an explanation, not a story, not an excuse. I know the truth." His eyes glossed with something close to tears, but I knew better. He'd always been good at crying on cue. Even as a child, he learned quickly what tears could buy. "Do you know what it's like?" I said slowly. "To love someone so much you'd give them your breath, your bones, your name, and have them look you in the eye and sell it like junk on the curb?" His bottom lip trembled. "I have scrubbed blood from your knees, prayed over your fevered body, held your hand at your father's funeral. I let my dreams die so yours could live. And this is what you give back?" Still silence. I pulled the flash drive from my purse and placed it on the tray. "Marie's launching an investigation. Randall has your insurance claim documents. This isn't just a mistake anymore, Malcolm. It's a crime." He looked pale now. Whatever mask he had been wearing started to crumble. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice cracking. "I'm your son." "No," I said. "You were. But the man in that video, he's not the boy I raised." He looked like he might collapse into himself. "I lost your father too young," I whispered, "and I held on to you like you were the only part of him left. I made you my reason to get up, to keep breathing, to stay alive." A long pause. "But maybe I held on too tight. Maybe I should have let go." That broke something in him. He looked away, face twisting in something not quite regret, not yet, but pain. Real pain. Maybe the first truth he'd felt in weeks. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. I stood. "What happens now is not up to me. You started this, you and Bethany. Now you'll see where it ends." I opened the door. Before I left, I turned back. "For what it's worth," I said softly, "I still hope you find your way back, but not into my home. Not anymore." And then I left him. Alone, with his lies, with his consequences. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And I'd buried a husband. After leaving room 214, I didn't drive straight home. I parked in the church lot 3 blocks from the hospital and sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing. I had just told my son he was no longer welcome in my life. And I meant it. The silence in the car was thick. My heartbeat was the only sound I could hear, a dull throb echoing the ache in my chest. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even shocked anymore. I was just hollow. I started the engine, drove slowly back to Prince Street, and pulled into the driveway of the house I had poured every piece of myself into. The house Malcolm and Bethany had plotted to take like vultures circling an old tree. As I stepped inside, I realized something had shifted. The house no longer felt warm. It no longer felt safe. The photos on the mantel, Malcolm's graduation, our family picnic in Cape May, the Thanksgiving where James burned the turkey, all those memories stared at me like ghosts. I had built this life with love, but somewhere along the way, the foundation had cracked. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the sink. The clock ticked. The sun filtered through the blinds. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't, and neither was Malcolm. That evening, Randall stopped by. "You okay?" he asked, stepping inside with a file folder and a cautious look. I nodded, but didn't smile. "He knows," I said, "all of it." Randall set the folder on the table and sat across from me. "Good," he said. "He should." Inside the folder were more documents. Bethany's book proposal, emails between her and a literary agent in New York, a draft press release for their story of triumph through tragedy. End quote. "She was planning a media tour," Randall said. "Already booked a podcast interview. The same week she pressured you to sign over the house." My stomach turned. "She didn't waste time." "She doesn't have to," he replied. "People love a story, especially the kind built on suffering." "But it's not her suffering," I said. "It's mine." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to go public?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I want the hospital to finish their investigation. And I want Bethany to sweat." Randall leaned back. "She will. She already is. Marie says Bethany got called in for questioning today. She tried to play dumb, but they've got emails, time logs, everything." I felt a strange peace settle over me. Not joy, nothing so light, but a steadiness. Let me ask you something, I said. Do you think people like Malcolm can come back from something like this? Randall looked at me, then down at his hands. I think people can, but most won't. Not unless they lose something they never thought they'd have to live without. I nodded slowly. Then I guess he's got his chance now. That night, I opened every window in the house. The autumn air swept through like a cleansing wind. I lit candles, lavender, the scent James used to love, and played one of his old records. Billie Holiday, soft and sad. I needed to remember who I was before all this. Not a victim, not a fool, but a woman who had survived too much to be broken by her own blood. The next day, I got a call from Marie. They've been suspended, both Malcolm and Bethany, she said, pending the insurance board's investigation. We're cooperating fully. I've turned over everything to the state. Thank you, I said quietly. One more thing, she added. There's a journalist. She caught wind of the footage from someone inside. She wants to talk to you, off the record. I hesitated. What's her angle? She says it's about systemic fraud. Caregivers manipulating narratives. But I think she knows there's a deeper story. There was, but I wasn't sure I was ready to tell it. I'll think about it, I said. I hung up and walked into the living room. For the first time in weeks, I dusted the mantel, adjusted the photos, fluffed the throw pillows on the couch. I even watered the dying plant in the corner, James's old peace lily, which hadn't bloomed since he passed. As I stood back and looked around, I realized something painful, but true. This house may never feel like home again, but maybe that was okay. Because home wasn't in the walls. It was in the woman who built it. And she was still here, standing, alive, and finally, wide awake. It was Thursday morning when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, not Randall, not Marie, not even the mailman, who usually dropped things at the box and sped off like the pavement was on fire. I'd just sat down with my coffee and a slice of yesterday's cornbread when the chime echoed through the house. I opened the door, and there he was. Malcolm. No wheelchair. No cane. Just him, standing in the clothes of a man who'd forgotten how to be honest. He looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in weight, like the lies were finally dragging his soul into the dirt. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't say yes. I just stepped aside. He walked past me and paused in the living room, eyes grazing over the familiar furniture, the photo frames, the crocheted throw his grandmother had made years ago. For a second, I wondered if he felt the same ache I did, like we were ghosts in a house that no longer belonged to either of us. "I shouldn't be here," he said, not turning around. "Then why are you?" He finally faced me. "Because I wanted to see you before it all explodes." I folded my arms. "You think this hasn't exploded already?" He didn't answer. I gestured toward the couch. "Sit, or don't. Doesn't matter to me." He sat, slowly, like the cushions might reject him too. "I got the letter from the hospital," he said quietly. "They're reviewing my entire case. Insurance has frozen everything. Bethany, she's threatening to leave." "She won't," I said. "Not until she squeezes the last dime from you." He looked at me then, really looked. "You were right. About all of it." I was Aders. I didn't feel triumphant, only tired. "I kept telling myself we were just trying to get ahead," he continued, "that we weren't hurting anybody." "You were hurting me." His throat bobbed. "I know. I just didn't think." "That's the problem," I snapped. "You didn't think. Or maybe you did and you just didn't care." He lowered his head. I sat across from him, the table between us like a courtroom barrier. "I gave you everything," I said, voice trembling now. "Everything. And you decided I was worth trading in for a lie." His eyes welled. "I'm sorry, Ma." "No," I said. "You're sorry it went wrong, not for what you did." He nodded slowly. "Maybe," I sighed. "So what do you want, Malcolm? Redemption? Forgiveness? Or just somewhere to hide while it all falls apart?" He stared at the floor. "I wanted to look you in the eye. One more time, before I lose everything." "That's the first honest thing you've said in weeks." We sat in silence. Then I asked the question that had haunted me since this all began. "Why, Malcolm? Why did you go along with it?" He took a breath. "Because I was drowning. I lost my job. Bills were piling up. Bethany said she had a plan. Said if I just played along, we could fix everything. Get ahead. Start fresh. At the cost of your mother's house? Your mother's heart?" He wiped a tear from his cheek. I thought I could make it up to you later. Later doesn't always come. He looked away. I stood. You need to go now. He rose to his feet, slowly, like he expected the house to pull him back down. At the door, he paused. If I end up alone in all this, if she leaves, if they take everything, will you still hate me? I looked at him long and hard. I'll never hate you, I said. But I won't protect you again. Not from this, not from yourself. His face crumpled slightly. Goodbye, Malcolm. And then I shut the door. I didn't watch him walk away. I didn't stand at the window like some wounded mother hoping for a change of heart. I sat back down, drank my cold coffee, and stared at the framed photo of us on the mantel. For the first time, I saw it not as a memory, but as a warning, a reminder of how far love can fall when it's betrayed. The next morning, the house felt hollow. Not like before when it was just quiet, but like all the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to fill the empty air. I walked through each room with slow steps, as if the wood itself was watching, waiting to see what I would do next. I wasn't sad. Not really. Just aware in a way I hadn't been before. Loss has a sound, a quiet hum at the edge of your thoughts, like footsteps in an empty hallway. You never forget it. You just learn to live beside it. I made coffee, black with 2 sugars, and stood by the window overlooking the porch swing. It swayed gently in the morning breeze, its chains creaking like old bones. I traced my fingers along the windowsill, thinking of all the moments that had happened here: birthdays, holidays, late-night talks, first steps, first heartbreaks. And somewhere in that long list was the moment I realized my son was a stranger wearing my child's face. The phone rang. I didn't jump. I just reached for it. Hello? Mrs. Jennings? The voice was cool, professional. This is Agent Harper from the State Insurance Board. My spine stiffened. Not with fear, but with attention. We have completed our preliminary review of the case involving Mr. Malcolm Jennings and Miss Bethany Clark, he continued. The evidence indicates substantial fraud and falsification of medical records. We will be filing charges. I exhaled slowly. The words were legal, sterile, but to me, they were validation. Not just for the facts, but for every moment of gut-wrenching doubt, betrayal, and sleepless nights I'd endured. Thank you, I said quietly. Mrs. Jennings, he paused. Were you aware that this investigation has uncovered other irregular claims tied to a network of facilitators and clinics? I sat up straighter in my chair. No, there may be more to this, he replied, and your cooperation might be critical. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew I would help. Not for fame, not for revenge, but because the truth deserved to be exposed, especially when it had hidden in plain sight. After the call ended, I set the phone down and went to the kitchen. The coffee was cold, but I didn't care. I looked out the window at the street below, quiet, unremarkable, ordinary in every way. And yet, nothing about this felt ordinary anymore. Later that morning, I decided to walk to the church, my usual sanctuary, on days when the world felt too heavy. The path took me past Mrs. Rowe's garden, where the roses were blooming despite the chill. I stopped to admire them, remembering the afternoons she and I had spent pruning and chatting about life and love and how to make the perfect peach cobbler. "Morning, Gloria," she called from her porch, hoe in hand. Her voice was warm, untouched by gossip or judgment. "Good morning," I replied with a soft smile. "You look as sturdy as ever," she said. "Coffee later?" I nodded. "I'll come by." It's Scribe. Her smile was a blessing I didn't even realize I needed. I continued my walk to the church, letting the rhythm of my steps guide my thoughts. What did I want now? Justice? Yes. And clarity. And maybe peace. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped inside. The light through the stained glass cast colors on the floor, reds, blues, golds like pieces of a broken rainbow someone had carefully arranged. I sat in the pew where I used to pray with James, recalling the smell of his cologne and the way his hand felt over mine during the hymns. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet. "Lord," I whispered in my mind, "not aloud, help me walk forward with strength and truth, not bitterness." When I opened my eyes, I felt lighter, not joyous, not healed, just steady, like a ship finding its anchor after a long storm. I stayed in the church longer than I expected, lost in thought and soft hymns playing somewhere in the distance. By the time I walked home, the day was warmer than it had been in weeks. Sunlight stretched over the pavement, melting shadows. I felt like that sun reaching into the cold corners and bringing something new, something hopeful. Inside, I made a list of calls I needed to make. Agent Harper, Marie, Randall, Mrs. Rowe. And somewhere on that list was also a place for forgiveness, not for what happened, but for what I would choose now. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a threshold, a place where I had lost and found myself again. And as I stood in the middle of the living room, hands slowly folding and unfolding, I realized something. I was ready to write the next chapter of my life, not as a broken mother, not as a betrayed woman, but as someone who had faced the darkest mirror and still chose to walk forward. I turned off the lights and made my way to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing with purpose. The day was just beginning. The call from Marie came just as the afternoon sun slanted through the living room windows, bringing warmth that felt almost out of place in my quiet house. I was folding laundry, something normal, mundane, almost comforting when the phone buzzed, jolting me out of my thoughts. "Mrs. Jennings?" "Yes," I said, straightening my shoulders. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "We've uncovered more," Marie said. "No preamble, no small talk, just those loaded words uncovered more." She explained that in reviewing the hospital's internal records and communications, they'd found several other cases similar to mine. Unusual claims, flagged documents, sudden recoveries that never added up. And again, the trail led back to the same private clinic in Montclair where Bethany's name had popped up, and where, according to credential logs, staff had authorized assessments for supposedly paralyzed patients before anyone else ever laid eyes on them. They weren't all hospital patients, Marie said. Some never even set foot inside a general ward. I blinked. My breath caught not from shock, but from the depth of the rot I was beginning to see. This wasn't just about my son. This was something systematic, something that preyed on people who trusted doctors and loved ones and the safety of their own homes. "Thank you, Marie," I said softly. "Please keep me informed." I hung up, folded the last shirt, and walked out into the backyard. The magnolia tree stood bare, its branches like dark veins against the bright sky. It had lost its blooms weeks ago, yet something about its starkness felt symbolic, like even beauty had a shedding season. That night, I dreamt of Malcolm as a child, not the man who betrayed me, but the boy with scraped knees and bright laughter. In the dream, he ran across a field toward me, arms open. I reached out, but just before our hands touched, the scene blurred and dissolved like smoke. I woke with a start, chest tight. I wasn't sure what the dream meant. Maybe it was grief. Or maybe it was just the echo of who he used to be, the version of him I couldn't bring myself to hate. The next morning, I went to my mailbox and found a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Be careful who you trust." No signature, just those words. My first instinct was fear. But then I felt something else resolve. I walked into the house, placed the letter on the counter, and made coffee. Black, strong, no sugar. I sat and thought about trust, how fragile it was, and how easily it could be weaponized. How I had given mine fully to my husband, to my son, to the idea of family, and how it had been twisted into something ugly by Malcolm and Bethany. Yet here I was, still standing. Later that day, I visited Mrs. Rowe. She was in her garden, tending to her roses with the same devotion she always had. "Morning, Gloria," she said, looking up with a gentle smile. "Morning," I replied. "We didn't talk about the letter. We didn't talk about the hospital. We just talked about the weather and the stubbornness of roses in cold soil." "Coffee later?" she asked. "I'd like that," I said. The simple kindness in her voice felt like a salve. After lunch, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out my notebook, the one where I'd been keeping track of every document, every conversation, every piece of evidence. I looked at the page I'd labeled Other Cases. The list was growing. I made a new entry. 143 Maple Street, Mrs. Henderson. 27, Willow Lane, Mr. Jacobs. 88 Pine Avenue, Mrs. Clark. Each name a real person, each a story waiting to be told. I closed the notebook and rubbed my temples. This wasn't just about my son anymore. This was about something bigger. A pattern, a system, a network built on lies and manipulation. I took a deep breath. If I was going to see this through to make sure no other mother, no other family, fell into the same trap, then I needed to prepare. Not just emotionally, legally, strategically, completely. That afternoon, I called Agent Harper back. "I want to help," I said, "not just with my case, but with the other ones too. I have a list." There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh, one that wasn't troubled but relieved. "We need people like you, Mrs. Jennings," he said, "people who care more about truth than fear." I didn't know where this path would lead. I didn't know how many battles were ahead. But for the first time in weeks, my sense of purpose was something beyond hurt. It was a driving force, a compass pointing toward justice, not just for me, but for others. That evening, as I walked home from Mrs. Rose with a cup of tea in hand and the scent of roses clinging to my coat, I thought about trust again and how it had been broken. But I also thought about rebuilding. Not the house, not the past, but the world as it should be, honest, fair, and unafraid of facing its own shadows. And with that thought, a new kind of strength took root inside me. Not the strength that comes from surviving, but the strength that comes from choosing to fight. The air in the hospital felt different now. I hadn't stepped inside since the day I confronted Malcolm, but today, I wasn't coming as a mother or a visitor. I was coming as a witness. Agent Harper had arranged for me to meet with the hospital's internal audit team. The investigation was now moving at full speed, and they needed my voice to fill in the blanks, the details that connected names, patterns, and motives. I walked through the front doors slowly, my heels tapping against the clean tile floors. It smelled like disinfectant and sterile hope, the kind that you cling to when your loved one is behind those white curtains. A security officer greeted me and led me to a private conference room. Inside sat 2 women and a man, each with notebooks, files, and expressions sharpened by months of suspicion. "Mrs. Jennings," said the lead auditor, a woman named Clarissa, her voice firm but not cold. "Thank you for coming." "I wish I didn't have to," I said, taking a seat. "But I'm here. I'm at a grade." Over the next hour, I recounted everything, how Bethany began pushing for the house transfer, how Malcolm faked his symptoms, how they manipulated the care team, and the day I discovered the footage. I shared timelines, receipts, details, even the exact words Bethany whispered into my hand that day she handed me the note. Clarissa and her team listened without interruption, except to ask clarifying questions. "Did you notice other patients or families acting strangely during your visits?" I paused. Yes, there was a man, older, in a wheelchair. His daughter was always pacing the halls. One time, I saw her arguing with a nurse about getting an MRI expedited. She said something like, "We need the paperwork before the second claim goes in." "Do you remember a name?" "No, but I remember her purse," I said. "Bright red, patent leather. She had a silver cross on the zipper." Clarissa made a note. "We'll cross-check footage from that day." Before I left, she added, "We're looking into a ring of fabricated care cases. Yours gave us the thread we needed to start pulling. Whatever happens next, you lit the fuse." That night, I sat on my porch with a notebook in my lap and my old transistor radio playing Ella Fitzgerald, low and steady. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn. I scribbled names, dates, phrases. The red purse, the MRI, the quiet nurse who always hesitated before scanning Malcolm's ID badge. I was becoming a different kind of witness, not just to my own pain, but to the damage this system allowed. The next morning, Randall called. "Bethany's fled." I stood up so fast the notebook fell from my lap. "She what?" "Left town, canceled her phone, took what's left in her joint account with Malcolm. We tracked her last transaction to a motel outside Syracuse. She's gone underground." End quote. I felt something harden inside me. She's running from accountability. She's trying to stay out of handcuffs. My voice dropped. "You'll find her." "I will." That evening, I went back through my footage again. Every second of it. I paused at moments that no longer just felt personal, they felt patterned. Bethany using the same lines, the same tone of care, the same manipulative expressions with Malcolm that I'd heard described in other witness accounts. It was a script. She wasn't just improvising betrayal, she'd rehearsed it. That night, while I was brushing my hair before bed, the doorbell rang. I froze. It was nearly 10. Too late for a neighbor, too dark for a casual drop-by. I took a breath and peeked through the peephole. A figure stood in the shadows, Male, older, holding something. I flicked on the porch light. It was Mr. Henderson, one of the names from my list. He looked frail, hat in hand, a man hollowed by secrets. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," he said, voice shaking. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. We sat in the living room. He held a small, battered folder in his lap. "My daughter, she told me not to talk, that it would ruin us." I waited, but I saw what you did. Heard what they said about you at the clinic, that you were fighting back. "I'm not alone," I said. "You aren't either." He opened the folder. Inside were papers, copies of his daughter's insurance claims, schedules that didn't match appointments, signatures forged on documents authorizing treatments he never received. "She said we'd be okay," he whispered. "She said I just had to act weak, that we'd move to Arizona and start over." I reached over and placed my hand gently over his. "We still can," I said, "but the right way." That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because I could feel the tide shifting. This wasn't just a personal reckoning anymore. It was a movement, and I was no longer standing alone. The snow came early that year, thin and quiet, like Grace but colder. It dusted the yard with white, settled on the magnolia branches, and blanketed Prince Street in a silence deeper than night. I walked outside every morning, just long enough to feel it on my face, as if the cold air could sweep out the remaining ghosts of the past month's lies, betrayal, fear, that sharp aching where love once lived without condition. Inside, the house was warm, but nothing had gone back to normal. Not really. I tried folding laundry, tried watering the plants, tried baking the sweet potato pie Mrs. Rowe had taught me to make years ago, but each slice, each folded shirt, each leaf felt like a memory snagged on a needle. Marie called in the afternoon. "We've got a meeting with the state board next week," she said. "They want your testimony in person. They think your statements and those other cases may help them secure indictments." I set my coffee down a little too fast. "I'll be there," I said. I didn't say what my heart was asking. "Are you sure I want to be seen like this?" But I didn't have to. The determination in my voice carried more story than my words ever could. The next morning, I stood by the kitchen window watching the smoke curl up from Mrs. Rowe's chimney. I thought about the faces on my list, the family on Maple Street, old Mr. Henderson, even my own Malcolm, stumbling under the weight of what he'd done. None of them deserved this, and yet, here we were, victims of far bigger lies and hidden machinery than any of us had ever dreamed possible. I thought of testimony like walking barefoot over glass, fragile, painful, but undeniably true. By noon, I was in the car, wrapped in my heaviest coat, the winter wind rattling against the windows as I drove toward Trenton, toward the State Insurance Board building where truth and law met in dry rooms with bright lights and long tables. When I walked into the hearing room, I carried myself as if I was prepared for war, not with anger, but with purpose. The walls were tall, the seats hard, the microphone cold and metal beneath my hands. I looked out at the board members and saw faces that knew justice only from textbooks, not from the trenches of real pain, and I felt both relief and sorrow because they needed this just as much as I did. The chairman spoke first. "Mrs. Jennings," he said, "thank you for being here. Your case has opened what appears to be a systemic abuse of patient care and insurance protocols. We understand you've gathered additional accounts. We're ready to hear from you." My voice didn't tremble the way I expected. "I wasn't prepared for this," I began. "When I first walked into the hospital that night, I thought I was just a mother caring for her son. But what I found was far bigger, far darker. Not just a lie between a mother and her child, but a network that thrives on vulnerability, on trust, on love." I shared my story. Not the surface, but the roots, growing from my kitchen table in Newark, to the halls of the hospital, to the frightened eyes of an elderly man clutching forged papers in my living room. I spoke about the list of other cases, about the clinic in Montclair, about how easily someone could turn pain into profit with a pen and a performance. By the time I finished, my throat ached not from fear, but from saying truths I had whispered too long into the dark. There was silence, a respectful one, then questions. After the session, people came up to me, investigators, attorneys, board members. Some offered condolences for what I'd endured. Others thanked me for the courage to step into the light with it. I answered patiently, because every question meant another strand of the web was being unraveled. Walking out of the building, past the glass doors into the cold winter air, I felt lighter, not free but unbound in a way I hadn't expected. The next day, I got a letter from Agent Harper. The network is under federal investigation. Subpoenas are going out. Some arrests may follow. I sat with that news for a long moment. Then I called Mrs. Rowe. "Tea?" I asked. She laughed. "Honey, you sound like you need a whole pot." I agreed. Later, as I walked back from her house, cupped mug in hand, a neighbor stopped me. "Are you Gloria Jennings?" she asked softly. "Yes," I replied. "You were on the news," she said. "You helped them find the truth." "Thank you." I smiled gently. "We're all in this together." And maybe that was the real change. Real justice wasn't just about exposing a few people in a courtroom. It was about restoring the trust that had been broken, giving voice to those who had been silenced, and reminding a community that truth, though heavy, is a light someone must carry. That night, I sat by the magnolia tree in the backyard. The branches were bare, skeletal against the moonlit sky. Snowflakes fell, one by one, like quiet blessings. I watched them settle, soft and white, covering the ground in forgiveness, not erasure, but peace. I placed both hands on the tree's rough bark. "You and I whispered. "We're still standing." And in that stillness, cold, radiant, and pure, I felt something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The call came on a Tuesday evening just as dusk curled its orange fingers around the house. I had just lit a small fire in the living room, hearth an old habit from winters past, and was wrapped in my favorite knit shawl, the one my sister gave me years ago after James died. It was warm, like comfort itself wrapped around my shoulders. The phone rang. "Mrs. Jennings?" It was Agent Harper. "We may have a solid lead on Bethany." My heart thudded, not with sudden joy, but with that old, familiar weight of hard truth. "Tell me," I said. "She contacted someone in Ohio, a motel near Columbus. She's trying to get a fresh start, apparently, and we've got her on a tracking order." I exhaled. "Good, but I want you to find Malcolm first." "We're working on it," he said. "Thank you." I hung up and stared into the fire. The flames flickered, dancing between shades of red and gold, a reminder that even in the coldest nights, warmth persists. Later that night, I found myself walking through old photo albums, the tangible memories of a life that once felt simple, secure, and full of love. There was James, smiling goofy at our wedding. There was young Malcolm, decked out in a Little League uniform that was too big for him. There I was, laughing, truly laughing for the last time before storms became my closest companions. At the back of one of the albums, I found a small folded note tucked between the pages, a quote my husband had once written. "Justice without mercy breeds only vengeance. Let mercy be your compass, but let truth be your foundation." I read it twice. Maybe that's why I wasn't done yet, not out of hate, but out of resolution. The next morning, I made my way to Mrs. Rowe's house. She was out in her garden, humming a tune I didn't recognize. "Morning, dear," she said, watering the blue hydrangeas. "Morning," I replied. She looked at me with those clear, wise eyes that had seen their fair share of human sorrow and joy. "You've been quiet," she said gently. "I've had a lot on my mind," I said. "You doing all right?" I folded my hands. "I am, but I'm thinking about forgiveness." Mrs. Rowe paused, leaning on her spade. "Forgiveness is not forgetting," she said. Then she pointed at the flowers. "But it makes space for the next season." Her words settled in me like autumn leaves finding the earth. I nodded. "I'd like some tea," she continued, "and maybe we can talk." We sat on her porch, watching the sky brighten into a clear morning, and I shared with her fears I hadn't spoken aloud about Malcolm, about Bethany, about the tangled mess of love, loyalty, and betrayal. Mrs. Rowe didn't offer easy answers. She didn't say, "Just forgive him." End quote. End quote. She said, "Forgive for you, so the fire inside you doesn't burn your own home." I took her words into the silence that followed. That evening, I got another call, this time from the state board. They needed a list of other potential victims who might be willing to testify. They hoped to build a civil suits task force. So I made another list. Carefully. With respect. Not as ammunition for revenge, but as a ledger for justice. Later that night, I took one of the old quilts from the guest room and spread it over the couch. I poured myself tea and sat there with a notebook in my lap, watching the fire in the hearth. I wasn't sad. I wasn't bitter. I was ready for the next truth, the next challenge, the next reclaiming of dignity. And then the phone rang again. It was Malcolm. I didn't pick up. Instead, I placed the phone down. A long moment passed. Then I walked into the kitchen, made another cup of tea, and sat back down in front of the fire. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a mother caught in someone else's lie. I felt like a woman standing in the light of her own truth. Because truth, like fire, can warm or it can burn, but it can never be ignored. The wind rattled the windows that night as I sat on the couch, wrapped in my shawl, staring into the fire. Snow dusted the porch, and I felt a strange mix of cold and warmth, like memories can be both gentle and piercing at the same time. The calls, the letters, the faces of other families, they all swirled in my mind like leaves caught in a winter gust. But there was one name that kept rising above the rest, cutting through everything like a blade. Malcolm. I hadn't returned his call. Not even once. Not a text. Not a message. But tonight, my phone buzzed again with a message that read simply, "Ma, I need to talk." For the first time, I felt neither anger nor distance. I felt worn down. Not broken, just tired. Tired in that deep bone way that makes you aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every moment you gave so much and weren't sure you still had another ounce to give. The next morning, the sun was a pale thing behind the clouds, like just enough light to remind you the night had passed. I got up early, brewed my coffee, and sat at the window with the steam curling between my fingers. The house was quiet, too quiet. I missed the ordinary noises, footsteps, laughter, even the frustration of real conversation because silence was heavy now. Agent Harper called again. "Mrs. Jennings," he began, "we have a potential sighting. Bethany was spotted near Akron, Ohio. Motel on Route 77. We're coordinating with local law enforcement." The Sismond, and quote, I felt a chill in the pit of my stomach, not the cold winter kind, but the kind that comes from knowing a confrontation is imminent. My lips tightened, and I folded my hands in my lap. "Thank you," I replied. "We're close," he said. "Real close." I didn't say anything more. Later that day, I found myself back in the kitchen, stirring a pot of vegetable soup, comfort food, but not the kind I shared with Malcolm anymore. Something hearty for me. Something sustained by truth, not deception. While it simmered, I caught my reflection in the window. The older woman that stared back wasn't the same one who had walked through the hospital doors months ago. There was something sharper in her eyes, less softness, more clarity. That afternoon, I bundled up and went for a walk. The neighborhood was quiet, with winter sleep mailboxes dotted with snow, driveways untouched by footprints, trees like silent sentinels. I walked past Mrs. Rowe's house and waved at her from the sidewalk. She waved back with a warm knowing in her eyes. "Come over for tea later," she called. "I will," I shouted back, and I meant it. When I returned home, I checked the mail bills, ads, and a plain white envelope with no return address. I opened it and found a single photograph. Not a threatening message this time. Just a picture of Malcolm standing in front of the hospital, coat wrapped tight around him, eyes shaded by a cap. I didn't know if the photo was recent, or if someone was trying to make me feel something, but I realized this. No matter how far he'd run, no matter how deep the betrayal went, blood doesn't ever leave your veins. That night, the neighborhood was hushed. Snow fell in soft, quiet layers like the world was just holding its breath. I sat near the fire once more, reviewing notes and phone numbers, thinking about everything I had learned, everything I had seen, and everything I still didn't know. Mrs. Rowe's call came just as the clock struck 10 tea time. Precisely. I wrapped myself in my coat and walked through the soft snow to her porch. She waited with 2 steaming mugs and her usual calm smile. "You look like someone with a lot on her mind," she said. I nodded. "I do. Care to share?" I took a sip of tea. Warmth spread through me like something I hadn't felt in a long time. "Malcolm's in trouble," I said softly. "Not just legal trouble, something deeper. And I don't know if he knows who he is anymore." She listened, eyes steady. "Sometimes people get lost before they can be found," she said finally. but that doesn't mean they deserve to stay lost. Her words didn't make it easier, but they made it clear. Love and truth can exist together, even if it hurts. Later that night, I sat by the fire and looked at the photograph of Malcolm. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel cold betrayal. I felt sorrow. Not the sorrow of broken trust, but the sorrow of someone you once believed in with all your heart. And as the fire crackled beside me and the wind whispered against the panes, I whispered back, I still love you. But I will not let love become your cage. Tomorrow, the journey would continue. And this time, I was ready for whatever came next. The first thing I noticed that morning was the silence. Not the usual quiet of a winter dawn, but the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, as if the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stood at the kitchen window, clutching my mug of tea like it was an anchor, and watched the snowflakes float to the ground in lazy spirals. My house, my once beloved home, was wrapped in white, beautiful, unforgiving, still. Agent Harper had called earlier with an update. Malcolm was cooperating with the investigation. That was all he said. Just those few words. They should have made me feel relief. Instead, I felt a hollow ache, like a distant echo. Because cooperation doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't undo lies. It doesn't bring back trust. I set the mug down and walked to the old sofa by the fireplace. The leather was cool beneath my hand, the embers long since died. My mind wandered back to the moment when everything changed, when a single note from a stranger set off a series of events that would unravel a lifetime of love and manipulation. Check the camera. You're being lied to. I could still hear those words. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the snow gather on the branches of the magnolia tree. No blossoms, just stark, bare limbs reaching toward the gray sky. It was winter in every sense of the word. I shivered. My phone buzzed. A message from Marie. They want to bring him in for formal questioning this afternoon. I exhaled. My breath fogged the glass. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I knew it wasn't this a summons that felt more like a reckoning than a reunion. I walked to my coat rack, pulled on my warmest jacket, and drove through the quiet streets. The path to the police station felt longer than it should have, as if each block stretched like an echo of the past I was still trying to understand. Inside, the room was sterile white walls, harsh lights, folding chairs that made conversations feel official, even when they weren't. Malcolm was already there when I entered. He looked different, not just older, but smaller, like betrayal had carved something out of him that nothing could fill. His posture wasn't weak, just hesitant. His eyes met mine for a brief flash, no anger, no pretense, just fear. We didn't speak at first. We sat in stiff chairs, side by side but separated by a table that should have been between us, but wasn't. A detective stepped in, polite, professional, all clipped questions and sharp pens. Mr. Jennings, are you willing to answer questions about your role in the alleged insurance fraud and medical falsification? Malcolm swallowed. Yes. End quote. I felt something inside me, something neither sorrow nor relief, just a quiet, heavy acknowledgement that he was not the man I believed him to be. One by one, the questions kept coming. And he answered, not with the smooth, rehearsed words of before, not with excuses, but with stammers, truths, and reluctant honesty. I watched his face change expression by expression as the weight of his own choices pressed into his shoulders like stones. It was painful, beautifully painful in a way a mother never wants for her child, but often must witness. At one point, the detective turned toward me. Mrs. Jennings, he said gently, do you wish to make a statement? I thought about it for a long moment. Then I stood. I cleared my throat, feeling every pair of eyes in the room settle onto me like a spotlight. I have nothing to gain here, I began slowly, and everything to lose. But I'm here because the truth matters. Not just for my son, but for every person who trusted this system, who believed in compassion, who was betrayed by someone they thought they loved. I looked at Malcolm just briefly, not to accuse, not to condemn, but to acknowledge. You were once my son, I said, not just the man sitting here today. And I still hope that, through all of this, you find your way back to honesty, not for me, but for yourself. There was a long pause, one of those infinite moments where time hangs in your lungs like frozen air. Then the detective spoke again. Thank you, Mrs. Jennings. Later, As I walked out into the cold afternoon, I felt strangely lighter, like something inside me had released. Not forgiveness, not closure, just truth. And truth, I learned, has a way of reshaping the world, not in a moment, not in a day, but in every breath that follows. The snow had stopped. The sky was beginning to open. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the warmth of possibility shaking off the frost, one fragile ray at a time. The first snow of spring came unexpectedly, a gentle hush of white that seemed to drift like memory itself, settling softly on the earth. I watched it fall from my kitchen window, teacup in hand, and felt that quiet peace I once thought impossible after months of turmoil, betrayal, and hard reckoning. I'd learned something real in all of this. Truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives like a morning snowfall, unexpected, silent, cleansing. It had been 1 week since Malcolm's formal questioning. In that time, the state police and insurance board continued their work. Arrests were being prepared. Several families had come forward with their stories. The hospital was making internal reforms. And even my phone, once a chorus of worry and unanswered pleas, had become a calm instrument of purpose and direction. I had begun to understand that justice wasn't a single moment, but a river that flowed slowly, reshaping what it touched. So when the phone rang that morning, I didn't jump. I simply picked up. "Mrs. Jennings?" It was Agent Harper's voice, steady, warm. "We're ready to move forward with the Civil Suits Task Force. We'd like you to be a consultant." I paused. Not because I wasn't honored, I was, but because the invitation carried meaning I hadn't expected. They didn't just want my evidence. They wanted me. "Of course," I said, my voice calm. "Thank you," he replied. "We'll send the details." I hung up with a quiet smile and walked out into the backyard. The magnolia tree, bare only weeks before, was starting to show tiny buds, a testament to seasons turning, roots deepening. Life didn't go back to how it was. It evolved. The next morning, I drove to the local community center. I was to speak at a small gathering, not as a victim, not as a hero, but as someone who'd walked through fire and come out willing to help others find their own way. Families affected by fraud, advocates, community leaders, people who believed in truth, not just headlines. I arrived early, greeted by shy smiles and nervous nods. I sat on the edge of the stage, watching the sunlight bloom through the tall windows like promise made visible. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't reach for anger. I didn't ask for pity. I spoke about honesty, about how love sometimes means demanding truth, even when it hurts, about finding courage in moments when you feel most alone. I talked about Malcolm not to condemn him, but to show that betrayal doesn't erase love, it just reframes it. Truth is not just a destination, I told them. It's the compass we use when the world gets loud, confusing, and frightening. And only when we face it, truly face it, can we find peace. A woman in the front row reached for my hand afterwards. She told me tears had fallen during the talk, not from sadness but from recognition, the feeling that someone finally understood their struggle. That night, I cooked dinner for 1 roast chicken and roasted carrots, something simple and grounding. I set the plate, lit a candle, and sat at the table not with sorrow, but with presence. Just then, my phone lit up with a message. "Mom, can we talk? M." It wasn't dramatic. No strings, no plea, just a simple request. I didn't rush to answer. I sat by the window for a moment, watching the snow melt gently into the earth below as if each drop was a reminder that what falls can also renew. Eventually, I retraced my steps to the phone. "Yes?" I wrote back. A pause. "I want to make things right." I didn't reply immediately. I breathed. Then I typed, "We can talk. Not we can fix everything. Not I forgive you already. But we can talk." Because after everything that had happened, the only place healing could begin was in honesty. And in that moment, quiet, unadorned, I realized something profound. Justice had come, not as a thunderous verdict, but as a calm invitation to truth. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. The sun rose early over Prince Street that morning, as if it knew today was going to be different. The magnolia tree in the front yard stirred in the gentle breeze, tiny buds hinting at the blooms to come. It was a scene full of promise, like nature itself was offering a quiet benediction for what lay ahead. I stood on the porch, coffee mug warm in my hands, and watched the light spread across the neighborhood, There was comfort in its simplicity, a reminder that life had seasons. Some were harsh, cold, and bereft of color like the winter just passed. But spring always followed. Always. The phone buzzed Malcolm's name, lighting up the screen. "I'm outside." I took a breath. Not one of fear, not one of hesitation, but of clarity. "I'm coming out." I stepped down from the porch, the wooden boards creaking like familiar voices greeting old friends. The wind carried the scent of new grass, and for a moment, it felt like all the broken pieces of the past months could be laid out in the sun and warmed into something whole again. He stood at the end of the walkway, hands tucked deep into his coat pockets, eyes cast toward the ground. Even when he looked up, there was uncertainty there, like he wasn't sure if this conversation was long overdue or too late. "Ma," he said softly. "Malcolm," I replied, my voice steady, warm, and gentle the way a mother's voice should be. We stood there for a long moment, not speaking, just letting the spring morning wrap around us like a shared memory we both once knew. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were simple but heavier than anything I'd heard in a long time. The kind of apology that didn't try to soften itself with excuses or justifications. Just truth. "I know," I said. He blinked, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I meant it," he continued. "Everything that day. That lie. It wasn't just wrong. It was shameful. I used you. I used your love, and I thought I could fix everything later, like later was some guarantee." End quote. I looked at him then. Not the version who had walked into my home with lies on his lips, not the man who had hidden behind a story of injury and deceit, but the truth of him, a son still learning how to be honest after too many years of pretending. "I forgive you," I said. Not because it was easy, not because it was simple, but because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. Forgiveness means you can walk forward without dragging yesterday behind you. He swallowed hard. "Ma, I don't know how to make this right." "You start with the truth," I said, "and you live by it." He nodded. We walked together toward the magnolia tree, the same tree that had stood through storms, seasons, and silence. "Your father planted this tree," I said, touching the rough bark gently. "He said it was stubborn just like you." He cracked a small smile. "Maybe that's why it's still standing," he replied. "Maybe," I said. We sat on the porch swing then, side by side, without pretending or performance. The buds overhead stirred in the breeze, whispering of new life and quiet persistence. Later, I would help him find work. Not out of mercy, but out of belief that people who own their mistakes and choose to walk forward deserve a place to stand. I would sit with him as he spoke with counselors, helped him face the impact of his choices, and encouraged him to reconnect with the lives he'd fractured. But for now, that morning light touching every corner of the yard, a season turning, and hope stirring like a quiet song, that was enough. Because justice had come in many forms, not just in investigations or indictments, not just in truth exposed or lies dismantled, but in forgiveness with boundaries, a healing that didn't erase the past, but built a future worthy of what remained true and unbreakable. I stood and stretched, feeling the sun warm my face. "Come inside," I said. "We've got tea brewing." And as we walked through the doorway together, I glanced once more at the magnolia tree bare months ago, now blossoming unknowingly toward the promise of spring. And I realized something deep and steady. Even after winter's longest night, the world still finds a way to bloom again. The story reminds us that truth, no matter how painful, is the only path to healing. Betrayal can break trust, but it does not have to break love. Through courage, forgiveness, and the willingness to confront what hurts, we can reclaim our dignity and rebuild what was lost. Justice isn't always loud. It often arrives quietly, in moments of honesty, and in the strength it takes to choose compassion without forgetting the truth.